with my father's favorite guest of all time, Dr. Laurence Kotlikoff of Boston University, and his new book on upside investing. I always botch the title, Money Magic, right? It's not magic money, it's money magic. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, it is Money Magic. Great to be with you, Josh. And it's, yeah, there is a section about investing, and I talk about upside investing, which is a really cool feature of economics-based financial planning. It's a way to play the market without really risking your living standard, which may sound completely crazy. How can you be in the stock market and not face any living standard risk? Well, you want me to explain that?
Sure, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, okay. So the basic idea is to play the stock market, treat the stock market as like going to the casino. So when I go to the casino, I leave my wallet in the hotel room. And that establishes a floor to my living standard because I don't take my credit cards. And then I also have another rule, which is that I don't spend any winnings at the casino until I leave the casino, until I actually have, you know, I'm halfway through playing the casino. I'm not ordering things online. And by the way, I don't go to the casino very often. I think I've gone twice in my life and lost $200 each time. But the stock market is a fantastic casino because if you play for a long time, on average, the amount of money you'll have at the end will be higher because it has an extremely high average rate of return, but lots of volatility. But so there's no guarantee you'll actually leave that casino. So if you start putting money into the stock market, let's say at 30, and you say, okay, I'm starting at 65, I'll gradually take it out over the next 15 years, and you spend along the way, assuming every penny is lost. And then when you're 65, you say, okay, now I'm going to look at what's in the S&P. I've had this money in there the whole time. I'm going to see what's there. I'm going to take out a 15th this year and convert it into safe assets, which would be inflation index bonds. And then the next year I'll take out a 14th of whatever's left. And I keep proceeding this way. And every time I take out money and make it safe, I can raise my living standard. And so I describe this in this book, Upside Investing, you know, in the book Money Magic. It's called Upside Investing. And the reason it's called Upside Investing is your living standard floor can only go up because you're not spending out of anything that's risky. You're just spending out of things that have been converted to safe assets. So there's only, you do take you do have a lower floor. If you put more in the stock market, you have a lower floor. So that's where you're taking a hit, but your living standard will never go below that. It will only go up. And the interesting thing is that, you know, we have the software Maxify Planner at maxify.com, which implements upside investing. And it's very interesting that when you run the program, that you can put a small amount, relatively small amount into stocks, just like 20% of your assets, and still have a very high upside. So you don't have to be putting in a huge amount of money into the market to have very good prospects of a much higher living standard when you retire.
Yeah, this is fantastic because I do a version of this with clients for years. And when I heard you talk about this, I'm like, man, this is like very similar to what I do. A little different. But the whole idea is you're not caring about the money at risk. Like you're leaving your checkbook at the casino. So walk through with me. You have somebody with, I don't know, $500,000 saved for retirement. They're
Right.
65. They take what, 250, put it in the casino, and 250 is guaranteed almost, something like that?
Well, I mean, they need to have, you know, maybe they put 50,000 or so, you know, at that point at 65, you're pretty.
It's different. You mean when somebody's 30?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. You know, you can still have an upside if you put it in for 15 years. If you're trying to have a bigger number at age 80, you could put in 50,000 and let it ride, and then plan your living. You know, put the rest into inflation index bonds called TIPS, Treasury Inflation Protected Securities, and that's going to be your credit cards at the hotel room. That's going to determine your base living standard. And then, starting at 80, you start, gradually taking out this money that you've been leaving in the market. And because you haven't been withdrawing along the way, you're not subjecting yourself to what's called sequence of return risk, which is that I take out the money right before the market goes up. And therefore, I've hurt myself because I took it out at the wrong time. So the secret here is a combination not just of investing in the market, not necessarily, going whole hog, but to some degree, investing in the market, but also maintaining a spending behavior, which is spending as if that money's gone. That's really important. So it's a combination of investing behavior and spending behavior. Wall Street has been focused just on our investing behavior for years. They've never said we needed to control our spending, because that's basically not fun news to tell people, right?
Yeah, it doesn't get anybody going.
Yeah,
it's like I remember those Dennis Hopper commercials, where he's living the dream.
Yeah.
And he could be broke, but he was still living the dream. So this is fantastic. So upside investing. But if you're 30, so this is kind of interesting. My theory has always been, and you're the first guy to kind of economically, that when you're young, it's kind of weird. I don't know if this is upside investing. I think this is something else in your book. But you go very conservative as you're first saving. And so I came from no money. So I started saving in my 20s as our business was growing. I didn't really take risk with my money in the stock market till I was like 30, which is sort of the exact opposite of what you hear. Because my idea was I wanted a fortress of a sizable amount in guaranteed things. Cash value insurance. And then when I want to say about 28, that's when I had my first big chunk. And it sounds very similar to upside investing, because I said, you know what? I'm not going to touch this for 30 years. So this is my long-term upside investing, my casino money. Because I had come from nothing. So I wanted safety first and then take risk for my retirement. Because I never knew, okay, my dad got disabled at 41. I didn't know how life was going to turn out, so I was kind of favoring conservatism. Is that upside investing, or that's another concept in your book?
I think that's very similar.
It's similar.
You're not counting on your chickens until they're hatched, is basically it. Safety First Investing is the title of a book that a colleague of mine at BU, Svi Bodhi, wrote, which is basically this idea, which is to try and insulate your life, make sure that you're covered, your liabilities are covered. And here your basic liability is some basic living standard. So you want to make sure that you can cover that. And by investing, a good chunk of your resources in inflation index bonds, you're doing that. And then the rest is your speculative money that you can let ride, but not count on, and not spend out of. So again, Wall Street hasn't been talking about joint investment and spending behavior. They've been talking about investing behavior. Bucketing trying to, I'm going to put some money in the stock market, and it's going to be there for sure in 30 years, and here's the average return. And I tell my client that they're going to get this much on average when they retire. But the problem is that you can't count on the average. So with upside investing in our software, we're showing people the range of the upsides. It could be a small upside or a big upside. But when you're letting something compound, the stock market compound for, let's say, 30 years, and it's got a 9.5% average real return, even though there's lots of variability, that general drift is going to have a very strong impact on the potential for an upside. So the key thing is not to kind of undermine that drift by eating out of the stocks along the way. So as long, when you start consuming, then you've got the possibility of two things happening. The stocks don't do too well, and then you've eaten up your nest egg along the way. You've consumed much more because you were sure they were going to be there, that you do well, because everybody does well on average in the market. That's not true. The market has performed well over 30-year periods, but we don't have actually independent data on lots of 30-year periods in the US. We have overlapping 30-year period data. So we only have about 3 observations of 30-year periods. Now, the guys on Wall Street will tell you that over any 30-year period, going back to 1928, the stock market has performed beautifully. Never went, had a negative 30-year cumulative return. But the reality is that that's using the same data over and over again. We only have 3 separate observations. We only have enough data for 3 observations. If you look at, there's a 30-year period in the data for Japan where the stock market fell 39% in nominal terms, and I would say about 80% in real terms after inflation. That was from like I guess about 1990 to 2010, 2020. It declined. It's starting to go up, I think, now. But there's no guarantee here, but we do know that the stocks have a high average return, and we know the variability, and we know that if we just let it ride, that drift will likely pay off for us.
Yeah, but so few people stay with it. So that's where I love the tips in your book on conservative money management. And folks, make sure you pick up the book, Money Magic. Go to, moneymagicbook.com. Where can they find your book?
Amazon or Barnes & Noble or your local bookstore. Everybody has it, Money Magic.
Or can people buy it on kotlikoff.net too?
You can find links to it there.
Okay.
You can also sign up for my newsletter, which is larrykotlikoff.substack.com.
And the subtitle is cool. An Economist's Secrets to More Money, Less Risk, and a Better Life. And it errs on the side of being conservative, which a lot of people are worried about right now. What's going on with the market? Get the book today or call me, 888-988-JOSH, and I'll give you the book for free when you schedule and keep your no-obligation review. 888-988-JOSH, 888-988-JOSH, 888-988-5674. And we're back with Dr. Laurence Kotlikoff talking about upside investing, which is basically the concept of, just to simplify it, whatever you have in the market, you should be willing to hold on for long periods of time. So if you're needing that money sooner, it should be out of the market and guaranteed things, whether it's insurance, inflation-protected bonds, annuities, things that you can draw down safely. I have a variation of that called the 10 by 10 approach. Maybe we can have you give an economist look at it. But it's basically, if you're 60 and you have whatever number, let's say you have, I don't know, 500 grand saved for retirement, you should not have more than 250 at risk. Take the other 250, draw down 25 grand a year over the next 10 years or something like that, live off that plus Social Security, and let that other 250 compound for the next 10. Generally, over 10-year periods of the time, the market, at the worst case, is usually flat. 2000 to 2010 was a bad period. 1930, 1940 was bad. But generally, 10-year periods are good and they'll recover. But too many focus on the pie. And I don't know if I wrote this in my book or not, but I wanted to write a book. I'm trademarking the title. It's called The Pie is a Lie. And I do not believe the pie is we have so much in stocks and so much in bonds. Like what happened with the pie in the last 6 months? The stock portion went down. The bond portion went down. So if you're buying bond index funds, you're losing 18%, 15%, 10%. And I know you've been warning people about that. What do you do if people they bought bond funds. What do you do with them? I mean, there's really very little. I mean, I guess they're liquid and they're a little safer than stock funds, but the old paradigm is smashed after the last 6 months. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the country's had really low interest rates, and that they only have one way to go, which is up. The inflation rate was really low. That only had one way to go. So the idea that you should be buying long-term 30-year bonds and getting maybe 2% nominal when we've had prices be rising in the post-war and at 2-3% a year, and sometimes much higher. In the 70s was growing around 10%. This seemed to me crazy for anybody to be buying nominal bonds. Inflation index bonds are protecting you against the inflation. On the other hand, the government is taxing the nominal return, the inflation protection that they're giving you. So they're not perfectly riskless in the sense that the degree to which you're hit by taxes depends on the inflation. So they're not perfect protections, but they're much safer than nominal bonds. I would continue to stay away from nominal bonds. I think that right now, given the inflation that we're facing, and it may continue, I'd be slow to pay off my mortgage, because the longer you wait to pay off your mortgage, you're paying back in watered down dollars. So that's actually a good thing for people that have mortgages. For people that have funds that they're trying to, I think the market's relatively low now, so putting money in the market seems like a good time. Putting money into things that are going to maintain value, like cars, like houses. There's a reason that these things are going up in price, have been, because they're good inflation protection devices. Or buying a year's worth of toilet tissue. What about that, Josh? If you have room in your basement.
I bought not a year's worth because I have 7 kids, but I bought a lot of toilet paper during COVID, when Costco had this deal. I guess it was for commercial, people. I literally bought this massive box, and I protected myself against inflation, but we'll see.
Yeah, good for you. Yeah, so there's it's tricky. It's hard to invest these days, but I think the main thing I was trying to get across for the upside investing is that we don't want to risk our basic living standard, especially if we're not working and just living on assets, and then we have half of those assets invested in the stock market, maybe half are in cash, and inflation takes off. We lose money on the cash. The purchasing power of cash has gone down 9.1% over the last 12 months. That's a huge loss for people. Or their nominal pensions have declined by 9 point. If you think about a Detroit firefighter who retired after Detroit went belly up, and they got 40 cents on the dollar, and that 40 cents on the dollar is not inflation protected in terms of the pension. So now they just lost another 9.1% in real terms what they were awarded. That's really terrible. So you have to think about, how can I get to safety and not kind of rely on something that's highly risky. And that's what the upside investing, again, is doing, which is saying, let's not spend out of it until there's something actually there, until we've left the casino, until we've turned the money that's in the market into something safe, into safe inflation index bonds. Then we can raise our permanent living standard. So you just have a living standard goes, it's flat, and then once you start converting, you've got it ratcheting up, and then it's going to be flat again when you're completely out of the market. So you have different potential upsides, but there's no downside.
No, that's beautiful. Or what I kind of tell clients, there's the mythic 10 grand a month. A married couple, retired, wants 10 grand a month. If you need 10 grand a month to live your standard of living, or 5 grand a month if you're single, whatever it might be, just 5 or 10 grand always seems to be the number that people say, I could do. You need that 10 grand to be guaranteed, whether it's inflation protected bonds, guaranteed annuity income, Social Security, loans from cash value insurance or cash, and then you could risk the rest. Because too many advisors over the years said, oh, you need stocks to keep pace with inflation. And then you go to retire. Imagine you retired December of 2021. You had $1 million. Now you have probably 800 grand. Inflation's up, and the stock market was no protection for inflation. So your upside investing concept solves the problem that people are dealing with now. And I think it makes a lot of sense. So I want to get your take on upside investing. If you have any other thoughts on upside investing, but I want to get your take on, since you're a world-renowned economist, on inflation. When is the inflation? I mean, transitory is a bad word, I guess now, because everybody mocks. But is there a temporal nature to it? Kind of we've had various guests on the show who, Jeff Snyder, Lacey Hunt, kind of, the world is disinflationary, and this inflation will be temporal, largely due to COVID supply chains. Maybe, 18 months it'll wear off, 12 months, they keep pushing it out. And then other economists like David Ranson and others say, you know what, it's funny, out of all the economists I've had on inflation, I don't know, Dr. Ranson, he's been around, I know you knew him, he must be, how old is he? He's been around forever. He was the one who spotted the inflation years ago, whenever we say deflation, because he did this thing with the gold futures market. And he had this cycles on gold, and he pinpointed it almost exactly. I got to get him back on talking about that. But he had this interesting metric which allowed him to predict it, that he said hasn't been wrong since 1879 on inflation. And, he back to the annals of history to figure that out. Now, some of those things work until they don't. But essentially, I want to get your take. When we return on inflation, where are you right now in the inflation camp? This is Josh Jelinski, the financial quarterback. Don't touch that dial. We'll be back after these messages. And we're back. I want you all to go to Kotlikoff.net, buy Money Magic, or call my office, 888-988-JOSH. And I will buy you this book. Best title cover I've seen in a while. I have a lot of authors on. Beautiful origami bunny rabbits that are made of money with a top hat. All these financial books.
Show me the book.
Yeah, show the book.
I know things are turning around here. People are getting dizzy probably, but this is the book.
It's a beautiful cover. Did you do the cover? Did Bridget?
Well, no, somebody at Little Brown and Spark. Great. We thought of the cover, my wife and I. But yeah, it's really cool. There's these little rabbits coming out of the hat.
You know what? Every financial book now, they have the tree, the money tree, or some variation of that. So I like that it's a new, an origami bunny coming out of a top hat. Money Magic and Economist Secrets to More Money, Less Risk, and a Better Life. And it's not the traditional stuff, but it is very conservative in nature. So if you're looking for something a little different, I think the book is very timely given the uncertainty that many investors face. So call us, 888-988-JOSH, and I will give you 7 ways to save taxes, 45-minute review. When you schedule and keep your no obligation review, you get this book, Money Magic, or you can go just buy it. Larry's always a great guest. And it's always funny when Larry goes off on the political tangents because we're on a conservative New York station. And then we get some of the listeners. They always get a rise. So we'll keep it more financially geared. We got to have me and you duke it out on politics. So that would be a good show. That would be fun. Okay. Although we agree on more than, probably.
Let's duke it out sometime.
We agree on 80%, but it's always fun. So we're talking money because that's what you're the best at, Social Security planning. did you ever did anybody ever come to you and say, you know what, when I was 18, I read your book, The Coming Generational Storm. Am I the only one who was like young reading that book? Like it was an eye-opening book for me as I don't know, what was I, 23? I loved that book. Do you get people who say that book changed my life?
Actually, a lot of people, yeah. I mean, I wrote that book with Scott Burns, who's a terrific writer for the Dallas Morning News, long-term columnist. And then we wrote another book called The Clash of Generations. And the whole idea here is to look at the long-term fiscal position of the U.S. and ask, are we leaving enormous bills for our kids? And the answer is yes. I mean, if you look just at and this connects back to the issue of inflation. You know, what do we really think is happening? Is it just a short-term phenomenon or a long-term situation? Well, our country is really broke, and you know, I have been writing about it with others or by myself for 40 years. And if you look at Social Security's red ink in their trustees report in Table 6F1 that is hidden in the back of the appendix, every year it comes out, and every year that number, the unfunded liability, the red ink of the system, the debt that it's the difference between all the projected outlays to pay for benefits minus all the projected receipts of Social Security, all the tax benefit receipts, and also the trust fund. The difference is 61 trillion right now. If you go back 2 years ago, it was about 40 trillion. About 50 trillion. So it's gone up dramatically. You know, 61 trillion, everybody needs to understand that's 2.5 years of GDP. Wow. So the official debt is 1 year of GDP. We have this other thing that's called unofficial debt that's 2.5 years of GDP. And that's just the beginning of our fiscal problems. You know, we have Medicare and Medicaid benefits that the Congressional Budget Office is projecting are going to keep rising as a share of GDP, and we have no way to pay for them. So we have problems. And when the governments get into long-term fiscal difficulties, they make money to make money. They print money to pay for their bills. And certainly that's part of what's going on, I think, with the inflation that we're now experiencing. On the other hand, we have certain products like oil, like gas, like grain that have risen, car prices have risen temporarily and are coming down. So there's signs that inflation will come down below where it's been. Whether it will go back up, we don't know. A lot of this depends on people's expectations of what other people are doing. If I'm in a company and I think other people are going to raise their prices, I want to make sure I can pay my employees a living wage if they're going to have to pay more for everything they buy. So,
and don't you think that's what happened? What's happening now? It's sort of like the inflation echo chamber.
Oh yeah, I think there's 35 or so million firms that are trying to figure out what to do, and a lot of them hadn't raised prices for quite a while because inflation was very low, and then all of a sudden they said, well, gee, I need to raise prices, but I don't want to do it every year. Let me just do a really big increase, so I won't have to do any increases for a couple of years. So part of this is like overshooting, and part of it is temporary supply chain issues. Part of it is people had excess pent-up demand for vacations and different things once, we got out from COVID. So it's probably about 2/3 supply side, 1/3 demand side. These factors are temporary, and probably we're going to have, less inflation in the next 6 months. And certainly the markets are believing that. But if you go back a year ago, the markets thought we were going to have about 2% inflation rather than 9.1% inflation. So we can't count on what Wall Street thinks, because
the market may be very wrong. Wall Street is typically wrong. Usually look at that consensus of Wall Street people and you do the opposite of what they say and you'll do better.
Yeah. So yes, but the long-term fiscal position of the country is problematic, very problematic. And then we've got, China, even though their population is shrinking by about the same size as 400 million people, that's bigger than the U.S. population. By the end of the century, they're going to have a lot fewer people, about 1.1 billion rather than 1.4 billion, which is what they have now. But on the other hand, they're going to be much more productive. So their economy is going to be about 2 to 3 times larger than ours. And then India's economy is going to be quite large. So I think if you put India and China together by the end of the century, they're going to control about half of the world's GDP, just those 2 countries.
Wow.
If things continue the way they are. And the U.S. is going to shrink as a share of world GDP. Europe is going to shrink. And so we're going to kind of flip positions.
So how are we going to be able to sustain our debt then?
Yeah, we're not necessarily going to be able to do that. We're not going to be able to print money and get.
I'm going to put up the usdebtclock.org for our YouTube audience. I'm sure you've seen this website. Is this accurate? I know you've done a lot of work on this.
Well, so the 30 trillion number in the far left, it should really be more like about 20 trillion, because about 10 trillion the Federal Reserve has printed money and bought back the debt. So they've monetized the debt over the years. So the debt in the hands of the public is really around 20 trillion. 1 year's GDP, our GDP is about 22 trillion this year. So it's a little bit, they're looking at gross debt rather than debt in the hands of the public, which we call net debt. But you can see it's getting bigger and bigger every minute, right? Every second.
And look at the U.S. unfunded liabilities, 170 trillion,
right.
512 grand per citizen. That's insane.
Yeah. Yes, and whether they're exactly doing these calculations the way I would do them, the main thing is that they're getting across the point that we're not paying for what we're spending, and we have no prospect of doing that. We have both parties saying the other parties should take the hit on raising taxes, but all this is coming out of the hides of our kids and grandkids, so it's not like a free lunch. And when we become a second-rate economic power, then it could be that the yuan takes over as the world's currency. I mean, when China is twice the size of the U.S., will everybody be using the dollar? So at that point, we're not going to necessarily be able to. If you think about what happened this year with U.S. debt, we have, as I said, about $20 trillion. Half of that's owned by foreigners. Maybe it's a little bit lower at this point, but a good chunk of it is owned by foreigners. They suffered a 9.1% decline in the real value of their debt because we had this inflation, and that watered down the real value of the debt by 9.1%. So when I say that governments make money by making money, they do it in different ways. If you print money and you go buy a chicken for the president for lunch, well, the government has the chicken, the public has the dollars. There's more dollars chasing fewer chickens that the public can buy. The price of chickens go up. Now everybody's original holdings of dollars are devalued. But also the IOUs that the government has to make good on, like its debt, its nominal debt, those IOUs get watered down too. So if you're holding a U.S. Treasury bond at the beginning of this year, or let's say a year ago, and it promises to pay a certain coupon and a principal after 20 years, and now prices are 9.1% higher, well, you've just lost 9.1% of the value of that security. So, and that went over to the government. That was an inflation tax. So the government is making money through this inflation. Let's be clear. And if the government gets into trying to make, the government's got a huge imbalance, and countries that start printing money to deal with their fiscal imbalances end up producing hyperinflation.
Never ends well, right?
Yeah, it doesn't end well. We're starting to see hyperinflation. Could it be through this due to this fiscal imbalance, or is it temporary supply side things? No economist can tell you for sure. I think that people are not, even though I've written many books,
Nobody knows.
and that people are not really onto the insolvency of the U.S. government to the extent they should be, and therefore they still trust the dollar at some level, even though the dollar has just betrayed them dramatically. You still have people buying U.S. Treasuries for 30 years at 3% nominal.
Yeah, it's a big investment. So, folks, we'll ask him that. Are we headed to Weimar? Are we headed to hyperinflation, Zimbabwe style? And I'll tell a story about my van that I bought that doubled in value from new to used after so many thousands of miles. When we return, this is Josh Jelinski, the financial quarterback. Get your book on upside investing and all of those things. Money Magic. You go to kotlikoff.net. Money Magic, an economist's secrets to more money, less risk, and a better life. That book will be given to you for free when you schedule and keep your no obligation 7 ways to save taxes review. 888-988-JOSH. 888-988-5674. We'll be back after these messages. And we're back with Professor Laurence Kotlikoff. School's in session. We're talking about everything. Hyperinflation, inflation. So before we go to hyperinflation, my van. Bought it for like 40 grand. The old church vans are like, I bought it for 40 grand for a company. Those big, 12-passenger vans. And Nissan NV, maybe it was like 45 grand with taxes and everything. I think I could sell that van today for 85 grand. So if that ain't hyperinflation, I don't know what is. I don't know why. I mean, it could be. It's really not hyperinflation. It's supply chains. It's Nissan stopped making the van. It's that the only types of van you can buy are Ford Transit. But it's interesting how everything from steak to, we had a guy on a little while ago, and he talked about like some guy who said the inflationary price of a sandwich went up 42%. So do you believe that we're headed to any type of hyperinflation scenario? And then I'll ask you, and then do you believe this inflation is transitory? I guess you would say potentially maybe 6 months, even though it's dangerous as an economist to say that.
I do think that inflation is going to come down. I do think that 6 months from now we'll probably be seeing inflation on a kind of a, if you take the monthly number and you extrapolate it for the year, it'll probably be running around 4%, and then it'll come down from there. I think the world still trusts the dollar, or that people don't really understand how broke the country is. They don't understand the long-term vulnerability of the U.S., the fact that we're not going to be the king on the block. If things could turn very badly in Ukraine very quickly, they're really trying to make that a completely dead zone they want to have a buffer zone, from what I can tell, between NATO and Russia, and want to kill everybody in the Ukraine. They're shooting missiles from and artillery from nuclear plants inside Ukraine. There's about 15 nuclear plants, and they've stationed their troops and their artillery in a place where if the Ukrainians fire at them, it could produce a nuclear disaster. So they're willing to risk that because they really do want to devastate the country. And I think unless the U.S. stands up, this will ultimately happen. They will overrun Ukraine in this, they'll either completely level it or make it uninhabitable or overrun it. Taiwan, we could see the Chinese invade Taiwan tomorrow. I don't see the U.S. going to war over Taiwan. So overnight, our economic global kind of dominance, hegemony will kind of disappear. It'll be clear that we're kind of more of a paper tiger, and that at that point the dollar could depreciate dramatically, and we could see much higher prices as imports, the dollar depreciates, prices of imports will go up. And yeah, we can get into an inflationary cycle that's very hard to get out of. We had inflation at basically, 9, 10, 8, 9, 10 for many years in the 70s. And it took a huge recession, almost as large as the Great Recession, to get people to believe that, to stop raising prices at the rate that they got used to doing. So this can be difficult, but the country ultimately has to pay its bills. We have to get our fiscal house in order. We have to understand that, where to pick our fights, and we have to realize we're not going to be the big king on the block forever.
But you generally see inflation cooling.
I generally see inflation as a temporary phenomenon right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I do.
And then when do we wake up and we lose our? When do people wake up to that we're a paper tiger? I mean, it's hard to predict any of these things, but
a paper with actually some Russian colleagues called "Future of Global Economic Power," and it's going to document through some pretty extensive research and simulation, taking into account the demographics of the world, the productivity catch up in the different regions, that the U.S. is just going to become roughly about 11% of world GDP. We're about 16% today. So we're going to just shrink through time. China's going to go from about 17% of world GDP to about 30%. And India will go from about 4% to 11%. And then you're going to have other regions like the Middle East expanding in terms of its economic power. So it's just going to be a very different world. And then we have to think about, the whole nuclear threat that people that we're facing from Korea, from Iran. I don't think that there's enough resolution here in the government to handle the problems we're facing. I think Biden needs to be much tougher on Russia. Say you've had your chance. Now we're going to have a ceasefire. If you don't accept it, you're at war with us, and call us bluff. And I think with China, we have to say any incursion in Taiwan, we're not going to get into a shooting match with you, but we're going to stop trading with you completely. You got to say things like this publicly so that we can cut off the problems before they happen. And with Iran, I think we have to say you can't be enriching your fuels to 60% so that you're that close to a nuclear weapon when you haven't done that, because you've known that if you did get that close, we were going to take you out. We have to make that clear to Iran that that's going to happen. These are the kinds of things that we need in the leadership of the government right now to keep we're not going to be the big king on, big kid on the block, but we want to transit in a way that's, that doesn't involve everything blowing up in front of us in real time.
So you think inflation is going to cool? So that's good news. U.S. is going to lose its hegemony. You write in your book, Money Magic, you talk about how figures lie and liars figure. Explain that quote.
That quote is from John Mitchell, who was the Attorney General of Richard Nixon. And he lied under oath to Congress about Watergate. He was actually one of the guys he probably instigated Watergate and hired Liddy and all these other people on the side. And he, in testifying during Watergate, he said, figures lie and liars figure. And I was listening to him as a kid, well, I guess when I was in college, and that stuck with me my entire life, that quote. And then he went to jail for perjury. So figures lie and liars figure. Well, it applies in lots of contexts. Think about Wall Street telling you that the stock market has never done poorly over 30 years. Again, they're using the same data over and over again, so they're not giving you any information that's actually valuable or reliable. Think about Wall Street focusing your attention on the average return on the market over the 30-year periods that they're measuring incorrectly. Well, the average return is not something anybody's going to experience. We're going to experience whatever return we're going to experience. We're going to experience outcomes, not averages. Think about Wall Street focusing our attention on our average life expectancy. Our life expectancy refers to an average. It's the average age at which we're going to die. By focusing our attention on that, we get the idea that we're going to die on time, and therefore that we need to take our Social Security early. And therefore, and when we do that, we can leave more money with the Wall Street investment advisors to earn fees on. So all these statements that we're getting out of Wall Street are focused on product sales, and they're subtly designed to mislead us and give us the wrong impression. And a lot of it is a very simple thing, which is talking about averages rather than outcomes, which we're not averages, we're outcomes. I have a section in the book where I talk about you're an outcome, not an average.
Yeah, I used to go, this was even, 14 years ago. I would do a seminar with a slide on the actual versus average returns that people experience. And the averages are very different than the actual outcomes. So, folks, we'll take our final break of the hour. We are live on Clubhouse, live on YouTube. If you have a question, type it in the chat box. I will bring you up on stage to ask Professor and world-renowned economist Laurence Kotlikoff, Professor of Economics at Boston University. Maybe you'll be around for little Josh maybe he can study for his PhD under you. That would be fun. This is Josh Jelinski, the financial quarterback. Don't touch that dial. Call us at 888-988-JOSH. I will give you the book Money Magic. By the way, it is I would say it's the book of the year for financial planning because it's different. It's refreshingly honest. So get the book, Money Magic, or I'll give it to you for free if you schedule and keep your no obligation review. We'll be back after these messages. And we're back. This is Josh Jelinski, the financial quarterback. If anybody has a question, type it in the chat box or raise your hand if you want to ask the good doctor any questions. So if you were to give a tip to investors and retirees right now, what would it be?
This is a very tricky time. I would make sure that your base living standard is, I think the upside investing is the best tip right now, that we keep money in the market, some money, but we not count on it. We not spend out of it. We control our spending, and that we just spend in a manner that's consistent with our having a base living standard that we can sustain right through the end of our days. And to achieve that, we're going to have to use inflation index bond, these tips, as an investment vehicle. So our software, Maxify.com, is set up to help you do the upside investing. So I think that's a really good tip. But there's all kinds of tips in the book and in my writings.
And to paraphrase that tip, it's really only put in the market what you're willing to see go down. And if you need it for lifestyle, like a pension or income in retirement, be more conservative with that money.
Yeah, don't count on it. But there's all kinds of tips in the book, like, don't borrow for college, pay off your mortgage. In normal times when we didn't have high inflation, you certainly want to pay off high debts. Like
I was right on this. We debated on this a while ago. I said, don't pay off the mortgage. That was the only thing we disagreed on.
No, you're right. We shouldn't pay. Yeah, but student loans are very high rate, credit card bills. Then for them, given that inflation is likely to be coming down, I think paying those off is a good idea.
Yeah. Or if you're financially irresponsible. If you're a financially irresponsible person, like my mother, and she rest in peace, she's with the Lord, but she didn't, if she had $2 in her pocket, she would give you $2. So she didn't really have a savings bone in her body. People like that who like seeing their house be theirs, sometimes those people can actually prepay their mortgage and they feel a sense of ownership and it's a good forced savings. But other than that, you generally don't pay it off. But go ahead, sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the biggest asset that we have to keep, be aware of is our human capital, our earnings potential. So I talk about not retiring at all if you can help, can avoid it, if you're physically fit and can keep working. I talk about looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics online data for occupations for what they're paying and thinking about switching occupations, thinking about switching. If you're in a given occupation, you can just online in 10 seconds see whether you can earn more money in a different city. Thinking about downsizing your home or just changing your home, living in a state where there's no federal state income tax. The people are doing this, but they're not doing it necessarily systematically. They're, I talked in the book about getting house rich. That's one of the chapter titles. And I talked about the fact that the house that we're now in Providence costs a third per square foot of what we were paying in Boston. And I didn't realize this until we started looking around during COVID because we were getting claustrophobic in this small apartment. So I thought, once we got this house, which is a fantastic house, it's 1720. It's one of the oldest, 302 years old, one of the oldest houses in the country.
Wow.
That I was so smart, my wife was so smart that we made this decision. But I realized that I'd actually been really stupid because we hadn't done it before. We hadn't done it 8 years earlier. We hadn't looked. And if you don't look at other occupations, you don't look around for other jobs, you don't look around for other housing options, then you're giving up opportunities to increase your living standard perfectly safely. And that's the key thing I'm trying to get across in this book, where it says, an economist's guide to secrets to more money. Well, that's more safe money. Dealing with Social Security and making sure you optimize your Social Security, not taking it too early, which most people are doing, and then giving up a couple $100,000 in the process. Making sure you don't screw up when you take widow's benefits versus retirement benefits. Making sure you understand all the benefits that you're due. Make sure you don't take Social Security early so you can leave money in the stock market in your 401k, which might go to hell, and then you've given up getting much higher Social Security benefits. All these things kind of interconnect. So there's lots of safe ways to get a higher living standard, even in these very tough times. So
yeah, that's
the
a good
book, software.
Yeah, you got to get the book, Money Magic and Economist Secrets to More Money, Less Risk, and a Better Life. I'll give that to you if you schedule and keep your no-obligation review at 888-988-JOSH. On the topic of green energy, Dan sent this question in. Is the green agenda sustainable with no infrastructure? Where are oil and natural gas prices going fourth quarter?
Well, I think they're probably going to come down because there's been a lot more pumping of production of oil in the U.S. and in other countries like Canada. Other oil producers are coming on board. May well be that Saudi Arabia is as well. So that's what happens naturally when you have a reduction in supply over here. You get an increase in supply over there. But the other thing I think we should keep in mind when you mentioned green energy, you're really referring to the whole issue of climate change. And we should be, at some level, thanking Putin for putting on what is close to a carbon tax for the world. We've been, people like me who believe that we're experiencing climate change, that we have to deal with it to protect our children and grandchildren. Even if on average there's not going to be a problem, there's a risk that it could be a problem. So we don't want to impose risk on our kids. And so we need to self-insure we need to insure the kids against bad outcomes and take steps today. And one way to do that economists favor is a carbon tax. Now, that means raising the price of gasoline by about $1. That just happened under Putin due to his invasion of Ukraine. So Putin has, in effect, put in a global carbon tax. And now everybody's saying this is terrible that the price of energy is so high and we should try and lower it. I don't get that. I think we should be thinking about keeping it up and raising it through time in accord with what economic modeling that I've done and others have done say we should do. We need to have high energy prices so that dirty energy prices so that we switch to clean energy. And we should be doing this with a tax rather than micromanaging every decision of every company as to what they should do in this industry or that industry. That's not the way forward. We really need to have a simple carbon tax and then let the market work on its own and let people compete.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that, but I mean, let the market decide. I mean, we have Teslas galore. I worry that the whole green energy thing is unsustainable and the people pushing it are disingenuous, because if you really wanted green energy, we should have some type of Marshall Plan on nuclear energy in every region, because as a Tesla owner, so I'm doing my part to help the environment, until the batteries leach their acid. I mean, how are they going to recycle these batteries? I guess that's another problem. But I think it's causing such enormous strain on the grid. We have to repair the grid if we want to do this green revolution, which I'm all for, making everything nuclear. But the green people don't want that. They want...
Well, nuclear...
Because then the nuclear waste.
Energy is safe right up, it's green right up until it's dirty, So we saw Fukushima. So, Josh, if you may be more up on the latest technology, if there were something that was really quite safe and where the spent fuel rods could be dealt with so that they're not sitting there for thousands of years, so that somebody, look at what's going on we have 15 nuclear plants. Only one is actually in operation in Ukraine. And the Russians are shooting from those 14, 15 plants, or the ones at least they've occupied, and they've turned them into effectively a kind of a nuclear weapon. So we have to be careful about that particular method. But I think we need to be investing at the government level in alternative energies into the research for them, like fusion, hydrogen, wave power. But I don't think we should be giving people credits for buying Teslas. I think we should have a carbon tax, and you pay at the pump for higher price for gasoline, and then you naturally will buy a Tesla because it's cheaper. I don't think we should be getting into you buy this and I give you this money. I think that's not efficient.
Yeah, I don't think I'm for less taxes. So I know you're asked on all these, and we'll kind of finish out the interview with this. I know you're asked a lot about governmental policy, and you were on Presidential's Council of Economic Advisors. Did Biden task you for anything, or you didn't get that invite yet?
I haven't been invited to join the administration, but I do talk to people in the administration. And
did they listen to you or not really? I know the Trump people were listening to you at one time.
Well, when you're talking to somebody, pretty high level people, and they're kind of learning and listening and they're agreeing with some suggestions, then you think you have an influence. Now, whether that actually ends up doing something, I don't know in the end, but I feel like, I write columns that say, hey, we should not be taxing inflation index bonds right now, the inflation component. We should give older people, a safe from taxation, from extra taxation way to deal with this inflation. So that's a message I've been conveying to high-level people in the administration. Maybe that will lead to some change in policy.
And what about the debt, or they don't care about that?
The debt, that becomes very political because,
Yeah.
you just said you don't like tax increases, right? A carbon tax.
Yeah, but if we had
tax
some
on carbon and we lowered other taxes, maybe that would be okay. But, if I said, if I'm a politician, I say, let's tax carbon, but let's lower some other taxes, then my opposition is going to say,
it's very difficult to have any type of tax increase. But I'd be for some type of grand compromise. But, like they were trying to do with the Bowles-Simpson plan, but nobody ever, that was not a great compromise. But for sure. So always fun to have you on Money Magic. Get the book. Great tips on upside investing, mortgage payoff, Social Security tips, and more. Get the book today, 888-988-JOSH, or if you schedule your 7 Ways to Save Taxes review at 888-988-JOSH. I'll give you the book for free. I want to thank you all for joining us. Get the book, Money Magic, and Economist Secrets to More Money, Less Risk, and a Better Life. I want to thank you, as always, for joining us, Dr. Kotlikoff.
Josh, great pleasure. Anytime.
Take care. And thank you on Clubhouse, YouTube, WOR, Spotify, iHeart, and podcast for listening.